Hello, thank you so much for joining me today. I'm going to be starting a new video blog series entitled Still Hoping. And the inspiration for this series has actually come from something that I just went through this last weekend where um, just everything kind of caught up to me. And I was very much tempted just to not have to deal with things anymore, just to give up. I was very discouraged, and a lot of those discouraging lies that like to come into our head were really just coming in there and starting to overwhelm me. And I was messaging my mom last night about how I was just really tired, and I'm just was trying to stand strong and stay positive and stay faithful and do what I knew the Lord had given me to do. But I was just getting tired of having to constantly stand and fight for every little thing. Um, and she reminded me of one of my favorite chapters in the Bible. It's actually Lamentations 3. And as you may know, Jeremiah, the prophet, wrote Lamentations 3. And Jeremiah is known for, his lamenting, because he was very burdened for Israel. And Jeremiah is one of those prophets that in Jeremiah, I don't exactly remember the verse, but he talks about how God knew him from the womb. And God knew that Jeremiah was going to be called to minister to Israel. And the challenge Jeremiah had was ministering to Israel was such a big challenge. He was often very discouraged and very down. But one of the things I love about Lamentations 3 is he talks in the first 20 verses about how he's so down and depressed, he's lonely, he's wondering, is God listening to him? He's just feeling so worn out that he even feels like he's physically just an old man. And he talks about all of that. And then after verse 20, he gets into how he still has hope. He still knows that God is working. He still sees God is working. And he goes into so many encouraging things. And I just wanted to share some of the thoughts that I've had reading through this chapter over the years, because as I said, it's actually one of my favorite chapters in the Bible because the Lord has used it many times during moments where I was discouraged or down, to keep me encouraged and to help me be able to take another step. Even if it was a tiny, teeny little shuffle, at least it was moving forward. And I just wanted to share some of that with you. In Lamentations 3, verses 1 to 20, I'm not necessarily going to read through all of them, but I'm just going to point out some of the highlights of things that I feel that we can actually compare with the different situations we face in our own lives. He talks in verse 1 right off the bat. He says, I am the man that has seen affliction by the rod of his wrath. And if you've lived for even a short period of time, you've probably seen affliction. And if you've lived for a long period of time, you've probably seen more than your fair share of situations in your life and situations in the rest of the world. Because let's face it, the world is hurting. There's a lot of hurting people out there. There's hurting people next to you in church. There's hurting people when you go to the grocery store, just all over. Everybody has their issues and their struggles that they face. And some of them are great, some of them are small, but what I've realized is it doesn't matter how big or how small your issues are or your hurts are. What matters is that you're hurting. And yes, from our perspective, we can see that, oh, so-and-so over there, they don't hurt as much as I do because look at everything they're able to do and look at all these things they're able to accomplish. But they have their own struggles that they feel are huge. And then I'm sure you can look at other people and be like, wow, I may be having it rough, but they've got it a lot worse. And it's all about perspective. And I think the main perspective we need to have towards each other is grace, because everybody is facing situations in their life that at times are insurmountable. And sometimes we get swallowed up by our little details that to us seem huge. But then when we look at somebody else, we're like, I really probably should focus on helping them with something. But Jeremiah right off the bat says that he's the man who's seen affliction. He feels like everything's turned against him. In verse 4, this is the part that I was saying where Jeremiah actually physically felt old. He said, my flesh and my skin hath he made old. He has broken my bones. I know that there have been times, and this past weekend was one of them, where, and even into Monday, today is Tuesday, I was just feeling like I was just old. You know, my grandpa on his deathbed told my mom, "I've had a bunch," and basically meaning he's had it. You know, he's ready to go. And I was feeling that way, and I'm like, I feel like I've had a bunch, but why should I have a bunch? I'm so young. I should be full of life. There should be so much out there for me. But sometimes our circumstances oppress us so much and overwhelm us so much that we just feel like we're old. We feel like we've been through so much. We just don't want to face another day. Um, I'll lay in my bed and I'll just pull covers over my head and be like, I don't want to get up. I don't want to do anything, because if I get up, it means I have to actually face situations around me that I just don't want to have to face. It means I have to look at this thing that I can't fix and wonder, you know, when is God going to provide for me to be able to do this? He talks about how he's compassed with gall and travail. There are moments in our lives where we just feel like, um, as a cartoon said when I was younger, when does the hurting stop? Um, it was like a key phrase for this one character in the cartoon, and he was constantly, you know, getting bashed by a rock, or you know, having situations where he was constantly being hurt, or whatever, and he would always ask, when does the hurting stop? And there's been many times I've asked myself that. It's like, you know, when everything comes around, you just begin to wonder, when does the hurting stop? You know, how come? How it's typical, you know, one thing's going wrong, it means all these other things can be wrong. You just compassed with just so much around you that just isn't going right. In verse 8, he says, um, when I cry and shout, he shutteth out my prayer. There are moments where it seems like God's not listening, where you're just praying to him and you're crying and you're just begging for deliverance, and it seems like he's not there. He's not listening. He's shutting you out. Those moments are really hard. One thing to remember, though, in those moments is that God is still working. Even when we can't see it, he's still working on our behalf. He has made me desolate. I was in derision to all my people. Jeremiah is saying there that, you know, basically what I see that meaning is that people around him didn't understand. They were looking at him like, Jeremiah, what's wrong with you? Why can't you just get up and face the world? You know, everyone faces trials and troubles. Why can't you just get out there and do it too? Have you ever been told that by somebody? One thing to remember is that people don't always understand what you're going through. Even if they've gone through exactly the same situation, they haven't gone through the exact same emotional challenges. They haven't lived your life. They don't know what you've been through and how that situation is affecting you differently than it's affected them. I know people who've been through a similar situation that my family went through, and they took it a lot harder than we did. And I know people who've been through it that, you know, flew through it much easier. It was just, okay, this happened, I'm moving on. And the thing to remember is that we have to have grace for each other. And we have to have grace for those who tell us their quote-unquote advice that we don't necessarily want to hear. There have been many moments that people have given me advice, and instead it just makes me feel angry at them, because it's like, really? I have heard all the advice. I know all of the tips. I know everything. You think this is my first rodeo here? Have grace for people. They're in derision. A lot of times they'll look at you with whatever situation you're going through, financial, physical, spiritual, mental, emotional, and they'll look at you and just be like, can't you just pull yourself together? But it's because they don't actually understand sometimes what you're experiencing. And that in itself can be very nerve-wracking and put you in a position that makes you feel discouraged. Jeremiah also says that he was filled with bitterness. Have you ever been filled with bitterness because of all the situations around you? A lot of times that bitterness comes from looking at what everybody else has and not being and focusing on more of your trials than your blessings. I'm not saying that all the time, but sometimes it is. So make sure that when that happens and you start feeling bitterness well up within you, that you examine it and try and get it out of your life, because if you don't, bitterness can really eat you up and make you a very resentful and angry person. In verse 16, he has also broken my teeth with gravel stones. He has covered me with ashes. He's broken. And I know that sometimes you feel broken, and then as situations continue to go, you feel even worse. And it's hard sometimes to mend that. In verse 17, thou hast removed my soul far off from peace. I forget prosperity. There are moments where you've been through so much for so long that you forget what it feels like to actually live, to actually feel like you can breathe and not like you're constantly drowning and treading water in the ocean and like you're constantly, choking on it. One of the things that I always tell myself when I'm going through that is, this too shall pass. And it's not always an encouragement to me. Sometimes when I'm in those moments where I'm drowning or I'm feeling like the waters might overwhelm me, I really have to just focus on little tiny things. Like just sometimes it's even, okay, I just took one step. I sat up in bed. Okay, got out of bed and I walked to the bathroom, or I walked to the kitchen. Sometimes you forget what it feels like to live. But if you keep moving forward, sometime that little needle's going to pop that balloon, and you're hopefully going to be able to rise and be set free from that. My strength and my hope is perished from the Lord. Verse 18 says that. And I'll tell you, I don't like feeling that way, where I've been through so much and so long that I just feel like I just don't have the strength and to keep on staying faithful. And I feel like my hope is gone, that God's going to come through and that He's going to provide. Misery, remembering mine affliction and my misery, the wormwood and the gall. So he remembers all of his affliction. He's remembering everything he's going through. He's tired. He's exhausted. He doesn't think he can take another step. And then Jeremiah has a turnaround. He says, my soul hath them still in remembrance, and is humbled in me. This I recall to my mind, therefore I have hope. Despite the fact that he remembers how he has been so down, he still remembers that, he has hope. And why does he have hope? He has hope because it is of the Lord's mercies that we are not consumed, because his compassions fail not. It's because of God that despite the fact that we have all of these things, despite the fact that maybe you've even felt like you just can't handle it anymore, you just want to end it. You just don't want to have to face life anymore. You'd be better off just, not being around. And sometimes you may even go to the Lord and say, Lord, just take me home. I don't want to face this anymore. I know I've done that many times. I'm just like, Lord, I'm so tired. Just take me home. I don't want to be here anymore. And then I have to remind myself that, the Lord hasn't allowed me to be completely consumed, because his mercies are new every morning. He loves and cares for us. If you're still on this earth, no matter how great your trial is, you're still here for a reason. And maybe God hasn't brought that reason about. And maybe you don't even know, and will never know while you're on this earth, what that reason is. Sometimes we touch people's lives that we don't even know about. And we are able to reach people that we're not going to know until someday that the Lord shows us in heaven the impact that all of our struggles and trials can be used for. And like I said, it's because of his mercy that we're not consumed, and because his compassions fail not. The Lord is a very compassionate, loving, and caring God. And I mean, if he wasn't, I know sometimes it's hard to keep that in focus and to remember that, but if he wasn't, why would he have sent his son to die for you and to give you a future in heaven that is so great? And I think that's what we need to focus on when we're going through the difficulties. We need to focus on what we actually have that God has set aside for us. We need to remember that despite the fact that we're going through something right now that feels so dark and dreary, and like we feel alone, we feel like no one's there, God has something in store for us that's better. And he's allowing those things to not consume us, to not continually keep us down. If we seek him, he will send a deliverance. I'm going to finish off right here and continue further in part 2, as I've already gone much longer than I wanted to. And I hope that you will join me for part 2 and see how Jeremiah actually continued to remind himself and continued to have hope, despite the fact that he was in his lowest place. Thank you so much for joining me today. Please remember to look on Facebook for A Song of Deliverance, YouTube also, and my blog at Blogspot. It's called asongofdeliverance.com, to check out new writings, new music, and whatnot. And I hope that we will speak again soon. Thank you so much. You have a blessed day.